Committee members, the committee will resume its meeting in public. And to begin, I will read into the record the motion that's currently on the floor as it has been amended to get us here. The motion reads that pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the decision made by the committee on Wednesday, June 18, 2025, the Minister of Jobs and Families, the Minister of Housing and Infrastructure, the Secretary of State for Seniors, the Secretary of State for Labour, and the Secretary of State for Children and Youth be invited to appear separately before the committee, each accompanied by their officials for a minimum of 1 hour to discuss their respective mandates and key priorities in their service to Canadians, the ministers, and that the committee direct the clerk to schedule these appearances before October the 10th, 2025, and if this is not possible, then at the earliest possible appearance. That the committee then undertake the following 3 studies on an urgent basis to ensure that the government has parliamentary advice on how to deal with employment and labour issues in Canada. 1. Disabilities undertake and prioritize employment, especially since youth employment no less be dedicated to this study. B. The Minister of Jobs and Families and the Secretary of State, brackets, Children and Youth, be invited to appear separately for 2 hours each alongside their officials. C. Students, recent graduates, employers, and labour market experts be invited to provide witness testimony and other witnesses at each party's discretion. D. The committee report their findings and recommendations to the House with a request for a government response pursuant to Standing Order 109. And E. In the interim, the committee immediately report to the House that it is alarmed over the 25-year low employment data. 2. That the committee undertake a study pursuant to Standing Order 1082 on the impact of the lack of a definition of the term work in Part 3 of the Canada Labour Code, and into the government's routine use of Section 107 of the Canada Labour Code to refer labour disputes to the Canada Industrial Relations Board, brackets CIRB, for binding arbitration, including their latest intervention ordering Air Canada and their flight attendants into binding arbitration despite the company's refusal to pay these attendants for their pre- and post-flight work, with a view to assessing the impacts these reversals have on the rights of workers in federally regulated industries, provided that A. The committee dedicate at least 4 meetings for this study. B. The following witnesses be invited to appear on separate panels for no less than 1 hour each. 1. The Minister of Jobs and Families. 2. The Secretary of State, bracket, Labour. 3. The Chair of CIRB. C. The committee invite the labour groups involved in each instance that the government invoked Section 107 of the Canada Labour Code since the beginning of 2024 to provide their testimony. D. The committee receive additional evidence from labour experts, economists, and other witnesses provided to the clerk by members of the committee. E. The committee report their findings and recommendations to the House with a request for a government response pursuant to Standing Order 109. F. And in the interim, the committee report to the House that it calls on the Minister of Jobs and Families to amend the Canada Labour Code to require federally regulated airlines to pay flight attendants for all hours they are on duty, not just the time they spend in the air. Number 3, that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee reports its findings to the House on the study on workers in the seasonal industry and the employment insurance program that was undertaken during the first session of the 44th Parliament, and that the evidence and documents gathered by the committee be taken into consideration during the current session, that pursuant to Standing Order 108, that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the committee requests that the government table a comprehensive response to the report. Currently being debated on the floor is an amendment to remove Section 2 of this motion. Discussion? Mr. Okay. Madame Koutrakis, Madame Goodrich, Mr. Janis, and then Ms. Gill.
Sorry, Chair, can I just a point of order to clarify the rules? So we have a motion on the floor, we have an amendment on the floor, and the amendment proposes to strike a study on the use of Section 107 of the Canada Labour Code. But we are not able to say in public who moved the amendment to strike that study unless someone is willing to own up to it. Is that correct?
Mr. Janis, is correct. You understand the rules of the committee. We are now in public, and currently before the floor is an amendment. And I have the floor, Madame Koutrakis, and then Ms. Gill, and Madam Goodrich, Madam Gill, and then back to Mr. Janis. And it's on the amendment to remove Section 2. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleagues for being around this table and doing the very difficult work that we are all tasked to do for all Canadians. I was the one that proposed in camera, I'm not afraid to own up to that, Mr. Janis, to strike item 2 from this proposal. And the reason for doing that is because currently, and I think everybody knows, all Canadians know, the minister has been very clear. She has ordered a probe, and the results of that probe are expected on October 17th. Many of the witnesses that are going to be called before this committee, if we were to go right now on this study, would not be able to provide us with a fulsome and wholesome testimony, because a lot of that information would possibly be redacted due to the litigation that is before us. So the reasoning for the request to strike it at this time is because we want to make sure that when this item, if this item ever comes back to the committee, we'll know with certainty what that probe gave us, the facts. Right now, we don't have any of that. If we go forward, as the entire motion of our colleague, Ms. Fox says, to occur before October 10th, well, the probe ends and the findings are going to be finished by October 17th. I can't see how we can go forward with this study at this time when we know that there is a probe happening at the same time. Do we want to have a study that is going to produce something that's important and will benefit all Canadians? Or do we want to have a study just because we're trying perhaps to embarrass the government because this is a hot issue right now and everybody's talking about it? I would like to think that that's not the case. I'd like to make sure that everyone around this table, are working in good faith for all Canadians. Let's find a way to reach a compromise and to allow for this probe to happen in the way that it's supposed to. And we're here to work together. I hope that I can count on the support of our colleagues across the way.
Ms. Goodrich on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to, perhaps we could ask the clerk if he could remind committee members about parliamentary privilege when it comes to witness testimony at committee and whether it can or cannot be used in a court. Understanding of parliamentary privilege is that nothing that a witness could say would actually be able to be used because of parliamentary privilege. And so for that matter, across Canada and the world this summer because of the Liberals' inaction on this very important issue. And this is something that I believe we need to get to the bottom of, and Canadians expect us to act. They still haven't found any kind of resolution to this issue. And one of the big challenges with that means that we still don't have an answer. And so there are people that are afraid to fly right now because they're afraid that they're going to get stuck like some of their friends, families, and coworkers did. And I think it is incumbent on us as parliamentarians to get to the bottom of this. So I was just wondering, now that the clerk has been able to find the Green Book, if perhaps he has that ability to give us that answer.
I will come back to that when the clerk advises. In the meantime, I'll go to Madame Gill on the amendment.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I feel that this part of the motion should in fact stay because we have a bit wider, broader picture on it. Of course, the Air Canada would made the headlines, but there are other airlines too who are going to be involved in that. And Christmas is coming up eventually, and we might have some serious problems. Now, Air Canada, we can use 107, if you will, of the Canada Labour Code, and they've been having problems with this particular part of the Labour Code in the past. The labor relations have not been clear, so the definition of what consists of work, the way they define it, we have to rejudge that and relook at it, see if we can interpret it differently. We don't have a really consistent definition for hours of work. Now, hours of work, to my mind, it's not only for flight attendants. It concerns all Canadians in precarious jobs, for example. We're in a situation where I would like that part of the economy, if we're going to travel, whether in Canada or outside of the country, a lot of people have to travel for business, for example. And it's not just a matter of the union that represents the flight assistance agents. So I think we should take it and really face the situation in its entirety.
Mr. Jennis on the amendment.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm glad we can have a discussion where we acknowledge what people's positions are. Just with respect to this amendment, we're on the second study. So we're proposing, as Conservatives, that we do proceed with doing a study of the government's use of Section 107 of the Canada Labour Code. My colleague opposite suggested that, in her view, it would be important that study not begin before October the 17th due to an internal process the government is undertaking. I don't want to be uncollaborative. I think the majority of the committee wants to see the study take place, as do we. I also don't think it's likely we would begin that study before October 17th anyways, given I think that we've now gotten to a point where there's agreement of the need to do a substantial employment. I propose instead that this study will not begin before October 17th, 2025. So I'll look to you, Chair, for advice procedurally here. I wonder if I can sub-amend the amendment to leave in the study but add that section. But you might find that was too substantial a sub-amendment to count as a sub-amendment, in which case we would have to vote down the amendment, but then I can move that additional proviso as a new amendment. Just to say, if the particular desire of the government is to say that because of internal processes they don't want this study to proceed before October 17th, we can meet in the middle on that and do the study, but after October 17th. However, If there are other reasons the government doesn't want to do the study at all, then I guess we'll just have to have the votes and let the chips fall where they may.
No, okay.
Sorry, Chair. I was just looking for some advice if that's a sub-amendment I can move, or if that's too dramatic a change.
It's too dramatic a change.
Okay, all right. So I'll just forecasting that such a future amendment will likely be in the future, but for now we'll oppose this amendment. But I think we can work on a compromise after that.
Okay, we're still on the amendment of Ms. Kotrakis, Madame de Rossier, and then Monsieur Joseph.
Monsieur le Président, les rapports.
Madame, no, Monsieur.
Ah, oui, désolé. Ça va? Oui. Merci beaucoup.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair and Mr. Joseph. I'd like to come back to the point that Ms. Kotrakis has raised, that meetings with the various stakeholders will occur in the next few weeks, and the government definitively wants to have a good outcome for the workers. These messages have been made quite clearly. I agree with the point that Ms. Gill has raised, the necessity to not focus too narrowly. It's not that the study should not occur, but primarily, when should it occur? When should we begin the discussions? And in fact, we probably won't have the report tabled at any time soon. It'll be next year.
A really important issue, and I think it merits a deep dive. It merits full, comprehensive study, and not one that is done in a way as to, like my colleague said, embarrass the government. I think Canadians deserve better than that. I think Canadian workers deserve better than that. And so I would like to, again, go back to, and I know we're discussing the amendment right now, but the initial discussion we had at the last committee meeting, I'm not sure if I can refer, but this is a very, very large motion that actually includes 4 things. And what it does is that it prevents us from, if adopted, if it goes forward, it prevents us from prioritizing. It actually basically prioritizes for the committee the studies that would be going forward and the order in which it would be going forward. And so the same way that we want to do one amendment at the time, I would also think that we would want to discuss one of these things at the time, and so that we're able to look at them each in their own validity. Alors, pour cette raison, ça c'est mon point de vue que je voulais parler.
And on those factors, this is what I'd like to share with you. That's my position anyway. Yes, Mr. Chair, my colleague has just outlined all the points that we want to deal with. For the second part, if we could remove, we're talking about the new government, and the word regular in there is a bit too strong, because we've been discussing this in 2014. And this particular regime in power has been elected last March. I don't know if Mr. Janus would like to remove that on a regular basis there. Routine use of section 107. Routine. Can we strike that word?
Discussion, further discussion on the amendment? Ms. Fancy?
Yeah.
Did you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, no, and in the effort to work collaboratively, I think that the federal government has been made aware of the deeply concerning allegations of unpaid work, which is center to some of this study. That's why on August, I believe it was 18th, of this year in 2025, where the probe was launched into unpaid work in the federally regulated airline sector. So today, we're following up on that work, and we're trying to create some concrete steps to get to the bottom line of those allegations, primarily through stakeholder outreach within the probe. The government has reached out to a lot of the different targeted stakeholders, including unions, including employees and employers, to participate in these consultations. So that's part of the reasoning behind striking this section as an amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Goodrich.
I appreciate that they're going to have these meetings, some behind closed doors, but like Canadians deserve to actually have answers on this. Like, there are countless Canadians that got stranded as a direct result of Liberal inaction. This isn't like this is the first time this has supposedly come to them. Conservatives have been talking about this. We talked about it in the last Parliament. I know that member wasn't here for this, but like this isn't something new. There was a private member's bill talking about how unpaid work won't fly. So this is not something that is like all of a sudden happened and like we couldn't have foreseen this happening. Conservatives were saying this was a serious problem before prorogation. So like, no, we need to study this.
Mr. Jennings?
Yeah, Chair, just to clarify, the motion on the floor right now is to strike the study. So to strike the second study, to not study at all the issues around Section 107. So our position is that we should study Section 107, which is why we're going to oppose this amendment. And if members would like to wordsmith, hopefully that wordsmithing is, done with the goal of getting to a conclusion and not just using the clock. But happy, it's fine to propose word modifications, but this particular amendment, which we oppose, is to strike that study completely. So I'll leave it there.
Discussion, Ms. Koutrakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to clarify that last point. The point we're trying to make, my dear colleague, Mr. Genuis, is right now is not the time to put a limit or a date for this study. Obviously, Canadians know about this issue. All of us want to make sure that Canadians who work get paid for the work that they do. We're just saying that right now is not the time to do that when we already know that there are going to be stakeholder meetings. We're going to be having the results October 17th. The results are going to be made public in the early year. And if we're going to come back to this committee and have a fulsome and a proper study, let's do it the right way. Just rushing through a study right now and say on or before October 10th to get all of this, even if it starts on October 17th, as you said earlier, why not wait to make sure that we are going to be dealing with facts and not just hearsay? Of course, all Canadians expect all Canadians to be paid for the work that they do. And this is an item that has really, really been top of mind for the minister and the ministry. And we want to make sure that we do the right thing by all employers and employees specifically to make sure that they get paid for the work that they do. And it is an item that is serious, and it deserves to have the proper study to make sure that we know what we're going to be dealing with on an ongoing basis. And if we need to change the legislation, and the minister has said this publicly, if there is currently a loophole in the labor code that needs to be amended, that is something that the government is going to be looking at. But first, we need to make sure that we know what we're dealing with and what we hear from the results of the probe. So we're not saying no to this study. We're saying no to this study at this particular moment. Let's make sure we have the facts first before we go forward and spend time on this important study.
Thank you, Madame Koutrakis. Monsieur Joseph, à vous.
Écoutez, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if Ms. Koutrakis will share my opinion, but perhaps we could set this question aside, just adjourn on this point, but it's up to you, Mr. Chair.
on the motion?
Collègues d'en face, à tout le monde, s'il y a possibilité.
If we could possibly come to a decision to adjourn this debate.
Monsieur Joseph, that you made a motion to adjourn a debate on the amendment that's currently on the floor.
Monsieur le Président.
Exactly so, Mr. Chair.
Just maybe a point of order, Chair, and I think this is what you're getting to, but just for precision, you don't adjourn debate on an amendment only. If you're adjourning debate, you're adjourning debate on everything that is being discussed. There's no, you could vote down the amendment, but if you're adjourning debate, you're adjourning debate.
Yes, I thought that was clear. It's adjourned debate on the amendment, but it's adjourned debate on the amendments being discussed on the motion. It would adjourn it all. So we clear? So we have a motion from Monsieur Joseph to adjourn debate on the amendment and the motion currently on the floor. Recorded vote. Clerk? To adjourn debate on the motion.
Madame Koutakis.
Yes?
Madame Desrochers. Yes. Miss Fancy.
Yes.
Monsieur Joseph.
Oui.
Miss Falk.
No.
Mr. Jennis.
No.
Miss Goodridge.
No.
Mr. Reynolds.
No.
Madame Gill.
No.
Debate. Madame Gill has her hand up. Madame Gill, you say? Madame de Rochier. À vous.
Merci. Merci beaucoup.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Now, I understand that we're still on the motion and amendments on the striking out of the paragraph 2 of this motion. Is there any way that we could come back to the text, and we would need a little bit of time to review which parts of the text could perhaps remain rather than striking out 2 altogether? Now, there are some aspects of this wording which we can keep. We're trying to find a compromise here because the stakes are high, particularly for workers, Canadians as a whole, and we'd like to find means of how to study the issue in order to more adequately understand what has occurred, how these laws or sections have been used over time. And we'd like to know to what the government will be committing. The context right now is very, very contemporary. It's in play today, and it's the reality out there. And we'd like to make sure that the solutions that are being sought are constructive, based on proper and clear motive, and not only to provide for media clips for the members of the opposition.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thanks again, Chair. I didn't know I wasn't expecting to respond to that. I can't tell flight attendants that we are not going to have a study on Section 107 of the Code. Even if we want to examine the question from another angle, I can't tell these people that, oh, it's not sufficient. We can do it. It's not that important. We can do it later. Well, this is a parliamentary committee, and we're not the government. It's the parliamentary committee. So we will be calling witnesses in public from various sources, and this can only enrich the study and our comprehension of the issues. Unremunerated work would include a number of other people other than flight attendants. I'd say that for me, whether it's for the population in my area, the intentions are, they don't want to see this factionalism of one group against another. I've met with flight attendants, I've met with the union reps, and they're saying that it is a rather urgent situation, not only for their memberships, but on other airlines, for example. And it's not only flight attendants. And as my colleague across the way was quite correct, it's not sufficient motive for discarding a report. This is a very, it's a point of inflection for working people. And we have to respect our responsibilities. We have to respect and represent. So, sure, it might end up with having a few video clips or
We'll suspend the going. Spend. Discussion on the motion as amended. Madame Gill, you were speaking when we lost translation.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quite simply, I'd like some clarification. I think there were a lot of conversations going on that the motion was already too broad and it would take many meetings of. Now, I'd like to make sure that we get those. We're being told it's too broad. Now we're told it's not broad enough. I'd like to make sure we get as much detail as we can when we do our studies.
Merci.
Well, thank you for the comment. No, I was referring rather to what you had said earlier, the importance of definition of work and the challenge that we have with the current labor code. Currently, we're using the current situation of Air Canada in order to see what application is being made of 107 of the code. Is that what we want to look at, or do we want to look at definitions in the code? Is it the flaws in the code or the use of the code? So perhaps you could expand a little bit about what you feel is the point of the study so that we can come to some agreement with an amendment or not.
Monsieur le Président, je ne veux pas parler avant que vous m'autorisiez à parler.
Well, I'm waiting for the word from the chair. Well, thank you. Well, there might be other elements that we'd like to add, of course. It's all very well to define labor or work. There's other characteristics or elements, factors that would be required to clear up the situation of the work context, per se. To my mind, it's a very ambiguous kind of a definition. It's not very specific. And we should perhaps be able to say, well, here are the blind spots, say here are the shortcomings, and we could work on that. Now, when we get up to finding a solution, we may discover other flaws. Now, the implementation of 107, of course, has had a mixed reaction. However, if we invite witnesses, they might decide to go off on a different track. However, we're talking about Air Canada, but there are other airlines. Now, I don't think we're going to look at the Canadian Labour Code in its entirety, but the definition of work or how that definition is applied to this situation is of interest and needs clarification. So that was my point, Mr. Chair.
If there's no discussion, then I'll have to go back to Mr. Jennings just to clarify if that was an amendment that you made.
I didn't make an amendment.
No,
I suggested a solution.
Yeah, I didn't think. So discussion on the main motion? Anybody? Mr. Koutrakis?
I'm just wondering if there's a willingness to talk about the end date of that study. You know, you had proposed not starting before October 17th. Is there a willingness to go beyond that date? And if there is a willingness to go beyond that date, what, in your view, would that look like? I just want to make sure that perhaps, you know, some of the dates that we will be discussing might make a little bit more sense, and that, you know, we will have the necessary information by that new date. So I'm just wondering if there's an openness, a willingness to look at that.
Yes, you tell me what date you want for that. Like, so the language I proposed was that the study begin no earlier than, and I took October 17th directly from you. So if you, I mean, we want to be reasonable here. I don't want October 17th, 2027 or something, but but if you want to change it to November 1st or something, that's fine. Just tell us what you want, but we with the goal of getting this done.
I think the issue that is also, and we've talked about this earlier, the results of that probe are not going to be ready before the new year in January. So that's an issue for us. Is that something that we could work with? Is that something that we could entertain as a compromise? I'm not sure. I mean, I'm trying to find something that we can all work with here.
Discussion? Madame de Rochier?
Madame Desrochers, oui. Est-ce que c'est possible?
Would it be possible? I think it'd be very difficult for us to move forward with the intent or perhaps the purpose of changing the Canadian Labour Code. We're trying to just examine what is going on, and we'd like to really be clear as to what the intent. If it's going forward, perhaps we should at least remove the sub-paragraph F, which reads, well, we undertake a study on the impact and the lack of definition. I'm looking for the French version here. That we undertake a study on the lack of a definition of Part 3 on that part of the Labor Code, its use for 107 of the Code, which is referring it to the Labor Council, we're looking only at flight attendants at this point and the implications. And it says in the interim, while we're doing that work, that's F, the committee, while the discussions are going underway with the various interveners, we would nonetheless go forward with some kind of changes to this the Canadian Labour Code. And in order to do that, we can't just, draft a small change and that's it. No, it's going to be a long-term project requiring changes to legislation. So we want to do our work correctly and appropriately, having heard from all the parties involved, all the stakeholders and witnesses. So in my mind, we would have to also strike out part F in particular.
Autre chose,
Monsieur Joseph.
Yeah, autre
Madame-
chose.
Madame
sorry.
Petrakis first.
Mr.
And
Chair,
you're next.
can I kindly request for a 5-minute suspension, if that's okay? I'd like to refer to the team and come back in 5 minutes.
We'll suspend for 5 minutes. Suspend. Just a moment.
Request for unanimous. Go ahead.
Thank you, and the interpreters are fine, so we'll resume, and we have a point of order from Mr. Jones.
Yeah. If we've been working on just trying to come up with a compromise so that we can move forward. So if you seek it, I believe you will find unanimous consent for the following. That we amend the motion, particularly in section 2, by removing the word routine, by removing the line with a view to assessing the impacts these referrals have on the rights of workers in federally regulated industries. That in section C, we remove everything after the word groups. That we remove section F, and that we add an additional section which says this study will begin no earlier than November 1st, 2025, and that after those changes are made, we proceed to an immediate vote on the main motion.
Okay, I'm going to have the clerk read back what's been proposed as amendments to the motion that relate to section 2. Clerk?
So you want me to read out the full motion as amended?
Well, the sections that are to be removed.
So section 2 would read that the committee undertake a study pursuant to Standing Order 1082 on the impact of the lack of a definition of the term work in Part 3 of the Canada Labour Code and into the government's use of Section 107 of the Canada Labour Code to refer labour disputes to the Canada Industrial Relations Board, in brackets CIRB, for binding arbitration, including their latest intervention ordering Air Canada and their flight attendants into binding arbitration despite the company's refusal to pay these attendants for their pre- and post-flight work, provided that A, the committee dedicate at least 4 meetings to this study, B, the following witnesses be invited to appear on separate panels for no less than 1 hour each. 1, the Minister of Jobs and Families. 2, the Secretary of State's, in parentheses, Labor. 3, the Chair of the CIRB. C, the committee invite labor groups. D, the committee receive additional evidence from labor experts, economists, and other witnesses provided to the clerk by members of the committee. E, the committee report their findings and recommendations to the House with a request for a government response pursuant to Standing Order 109. And the new F would be, this study will begin no earlier than November 1st, 2025.
You've heard the amendment to section 2. Is there unanimity, or you want to vote on the section 2 as now amended?
Chair, there's no vote. I requested unanimous consent for a series of things.
So we
either agree or we don't.
So I see agreement to the amendments that were raised by Mr. Janis. With that, then I'm going to take to a vote on the motion as now amended. Record a vote on the motion as amended.
Madame Koutrakis.
Yes.
Madame Desrochers.
Yes.
Miss Fancy.
Yes.
Mr. Joseph.
Oui.
Miss Falk.
Yes.
Mr. Janis.
Yes.
Mr. Waugh.
Yes.
Mr. Seaback.
Yes.
Madame Gill.
Motion has been adopted as amended. Madame Koutrakis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say thank you very much to my colleagues from the opposition parties for really working hard to find a place where we can all agree and move forward. And I know that I speak on behalf of all my colleagues to say thank you very much, and we really appreciate all the good work and the hard work that we did here today.
Thank you. Seeing nothing further, and we are beyond the time, I move that the committee adjourn. Adjourn.